Good Saturday morning to you and happy hurricane season, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook for today, the first day of hurricane season, June 1st, 2024. Let's get started, kind of going over everything that is happening in the Atlantic right now, and obviously on this June 1st, it is nice and quiet, nothing expected over the next 7 days, over the next week. Although that might change, and we'll look at why in just a moment. But of course, since today is the beginning of the hurricane season, the National Hurricane Center has the list of hurricane names and everything about how they're going to do stuff this hurricane season. It's a very long sort of text, unlike the typical text that they usually release for a regular tropical weather bulletin. And of course, when it comes to names this year, the first one up is Alberto. So whenever we do get our first name storm this year, Alberta will be the first name that we use. In the Eastern Pacific, in the meanwhile, there is a small chance for development. There's a 10% chance just south of Central America and Mexico. This doesn't seem like it's going to do much, though. There's really no model support for this, so I wouldn't be really worried about anything coming out of this area. So it looks like the Eastern Pacific, in the meanwhile, will remain on the quiet side as well. Taking a look at a visible shot of the Atlantic, you could see it is quiet, still lots of strong wind shear, and you could see right now there's also lots of dry air in the sort of atmospheric state of the Atlantic. We do have some tropical waves, though, kind of roaming around, and those will probably continue over the next several weeks, and eventually we'll probably see one of these tropical waves maybe end up in more favorable conditions over the next several weeks as we head into the western Atlantic, and maybe we might get development very soon, or at least towards the middle part of the month, especially around the Caribbean general area. Some of the climate models, or at least the longer range models, not the climate models, although we will be talking about climate models today, but some longer range models, such as the European ensembles, indicate velocity potential and general rising air to set itself up in the Western Hemisphere, right near the Caribbean and generally in the East Pac area, right where we would kind of watch it. So we probably will see eventually one of these tropical waves maybe come in into the Caribbean, kind of mix around with the Central American gyre, and maybe things might get more favorable towards the middle part of the month, and we'll go over how that's happening in just a moment. But also in the Eastern Pacific, you could actually see our area of interest, the 1010 area right here off the coast, just south of Mexico, and you could see why it's probably not going to develop. It's very disorganized, convective activity scattered all over the place, and atmospherically things are probably not in its favor as well. Taking a look at sea surface temperature anomalies, so this is the day behind, so it's not exactly June 1st on the sea surface temperature anomalies, but it's close enough. It's only a day behind, and it generally, you could get the idea, and it's just incredible, and I continue to say this, but it really is just incredible how warm the Atlantic has remained throughout the entire winter and spring. And now that we're into hurricane season and the warmth is still persistent, it just goes to show, I think, the pattern that we have for this year is locked in and loaded. I think it is very certain that this year will be an active hurricane season. You can see just how warm the Atlantic is, widespread anomalies as much as 2, even 3 degrees Celsius, and that's not only in the MDR now, it's even in the subtropics too, and even in the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico is at near record highs, even at record highs in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies in some places, the Caribbean as well, and even in the Bahamas. And this is very concerning. We're not only seeing this warmth in the deep tropics, but we're also seeing this incredible warmth closer to us as well in the Western Atlantic and in the general Caribbean and Gulf, especially where we would watch it earlier on in the season. It is very warm and it is very primed for lots of development to occur. And of course, we also have our developing La Nina in the Pacific as well. That'll also play a huge factor into this hurricane season, but I just really quickly want to go over. It's just incredible how warm the Atlantic is. This is a tweet from Brian McNulty. And he says, and we thought 2023 was bad because last year was also record warm in the Atlantic. And it just goes to show how incredible this warmth that we're seeing in the Atlantic remain to the level that we have it right now. And you can just see on the map, the North Atlantic sea surface temperature map right now, This orange line was last year. Yeah, it was last year. And the red line that we have, which is above the orange line last year, that's this year. So that means in terms of the entire North Atlantic in sea surface temperatures, we are at record warm. And this is also quite astonishing. This is a probability of occurrence, so probably meaning just I guess a graph to represent just how rare, how warm the Atlantic is right now. We are right now between a 0.0032 chance of a probability of this occurring again, basically meaning that the Atlantic is at all-time record highs right now, and it is just primed for extreme development. And the climate models have definitely latched onto this. Republican Weather tweeted this, the June CANSIPS, which was released last night, I think. He explains wetter than average entire MDR, Gulf East and Southeast United States coastline, basically meaning precipitation anomalies on the CANSIPS. Very, very favorable. You see lots of precipitation, all concentrated in the deep tropics region of the Atlantic, probably meaning there will, one, be lots of strong tropical waves, and two, probably lots of moisture in the atmosphere for systems to develop. And probably maybe the model too is hinting at the chance that it's probably picking up on systems, lots of development occurring in general in the deep tropics. And it makes sense with the record warm sea surface temperature anomalies that we have. And even on the CANSIPS updated for June, it shows that. And we always talk about the positive AMO signature when we look at in terms of configuration of sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic. Whenever we see this horseshoe shape, this ring of warm sea surface temperatures stretching all the way from the North Atlantic down into the Canary Current and into the tropics, and especially also with this colder area in the subtropics, although even that is somewhat above normal too. But just generally look at how warm the Atlantic is. Look at how really, really warm the Caribbean is. It just goes to show how much the models are really aggressive on this hurricane season. And obviously, given that the Atlantic is very warm, and most importantly, not only is it warm now, but it's expected to remain warm, because this is actually for the August, September, October period, the peak period of the Atlantic hurricane season. They expect the sea surface temperature anomalies to basically remain where they are right now. And if we have that persist into the peak, I can assure you it is definitely going to be a very interesting picture. When it comes, actually, he did have some more graphs. Oh, this is probably just the monthly breakdown that the CANSIPS has instead of 3-month average. But once again, it just goes to show, look at all that precipitation we see spread out throughout the entire tropical Atlantic, once again indicating conditions. It just probably indicates conditions atmospherically and also in terms of how development will occur. It's just all very favorable for a very active hurricane season this year. What about right now, though? What about what we're expecting over the next week or so? At least on the GFS, there's not much happening, and I'll just zoom it out at least in the next week at hour 168. Not much really happening. We're at June 8th, so we're at a full week into the hurricane season, and nothing much is happening right now. I guess some sort of area of vorticity maybe gets going. At least that's what the GFS shows near the Yucatan Peninsula. It does seem like, once again, things will become favorable atmospherically for stuff to kind of get going in this portion of the Western Hemisphere in the Caribbean and Gulf as we head into mid-June. And the models have thrown out some signals from time to time, at least with the ensembles, whether or not they're trying to show development in this region. Although it's not really coherent right now, and we're into June 1st. And we still don't have any coherent signal in the modeling right now. So what I would assume is probably we need a watch, especially as we head into the second or third week of June, for anything to really get going. At least given that as up to 7 days right now, nothing much is happening on the GFS. And let's even take a look at the European, to see what's happening. Let's actually bring it to the 0Z right now. I got a notification. Let me see. Let me really quickly deal with this. But anyways, sorry, I had to deal with something. Let's take a look at the European. Let's put it on the 0Z, and you can see even up to 168 hours out. Maybe they're showing a little bit of vorticity in the Western Caribbean. Doesn't really get all that defined though. And so at least what we could take away from the models is nothing to really be worried about over the next week. But I'll show you when we look at the velocity potential. This represents rising motion in the atmosphere, and these greens and these blues represent where there's more favorable rising motion in the atmosphere. And notice where this is on the map. This is the map representing the globe in the bottom, and notice where these greens are, especially after around the first week of June into the middle and latter half of June. The area of rising motion is directly in the Western Hemisphere, in the Caribbean and Gulf, right where we expect it this time of year. And this is something that all of the models are indicating, that conditions will become more favorable as we head into mid-June. Model signals are starting to potentially pick up on it in the long range. And it makes sense given how warm sea surface temperature anomalies are in the region, and just generally the background state, especially with the developing La Nina we have. It just makes sense that we could be potentially watching for development in this part of the region, although that also includes the Eastern Pacific too, since typically in the early season when we get rising motion in general, favorable for the Western Hemisphere, it especially favors in the early season the Eastern Pacific, although we tend to get development as well in the Atlantic, especially in a year like this where we have a developing La Nina and very warm sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic. But even if we don't get development out of this, I do want to point out in terms of activity, early season activity, even if the early season this year is not necessarily huge, we still can get development to occur. Um, and I'll show you, because June 1st, this is where we are on the climatology map. I guess the big thing I want to point out is look at where we are June 1st in terms of climatology in the Atlantic. And I'll continue to bring this up as we head throughout the season, because look at where we are June 1st. Barely any activity tends to occur early on in the season. And look at how much activity we really don't expect up until we get to August, especially the latter half of August, when we have the infamous hurricane season rapid incline from August 20th onward. That's when we really start to see things rapidly increase in terms of activity. And the peak of the hurricane season doesn't happen until September. And especially over the last several years, we had instances where the early season was not really all that active, but once we got to August 20th, it's almost as if a switch turned on in the Atlantic, and suddenly we got so much activity. So don't be surprised, even if the early season is not that active. Trust me, especially once we get to August and September, especially probably September, things will be really active, and this is when we'll probably see all of these predictions for a really active hurricane season come to fruition. Doesn't mean it's always going to happen early on, but I can assure you by the peak, it'll definitely happen. So definitely watch out for that. And if you want actual predictions on what I think, make sure to join us tonight. This is day one of the 2024 hurricane season. It'll be a live stream, about an hour or so. Usually I do it around two hours, maybe even 2.5 hours in most years. But since there's not much going on, at least in terms of active development in the Atlantic this year, not really talking about much. So it's probably just going to be an hour-long live stream, but I'm going to go over predictions, what I believe for the hurricane season this year. It's all going to happen 7 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time tonight. I'm going to have several of my friends on, maybe one or two of my friends, maybe some other people. Still got to check around, but I'm at least going to have some other people on tonight. We're going to talk about what we believe for hurricane season, just generally conversations about hurricane season. I'm going to release new predictions, not only for the Atlantic, but I'm also going to include Pacific predictions as well, specifically for the Eastern Pacific. I don't really focus much on the Western Pacific, but either way, think of it as a celebration that we're going to do tonight for kicking off the hurricane season 2024, since today is the first day, June 1st. And after this, we have 182 more days to go. So with that, we're probably going to find out within the next 182 days will indeed this hurricane season be as active as all the forecasts put it out to be? We're going to find that out, and we'll find it out together. And hopefully you'll join us along in the journey and finding out just how active this hurricane season will be. Of course, starting with hopefully you tuning in tonight at 7 o'clock. And if you're just new to the channel, would really encourage it if you like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends so we could get as many people tracking this year as well, especially since this year is expected to be really active. So I would really appreciate it if you help forward the information to everybody. And also get to get a bigger community as well. It's always useful and it's always nice as well in the end. With that being said, though, thanks for watching. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all. And I'll see you once again tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, June 1st, start of the hurricane season. Here we go.